It's my pleasure to introduce our presenters today, Dr. Chris Brenner, Associate Professor of Community and Regional Development in the Human Ecology Department and Executive Committee Member at the UC Davis Center for Regional Change. We also have Sergio Cuellar, Community Engagement Coordinator at the Center for Regional Change. Their presentation today is on the Center's new online tool called the Regional Opportunity Index. The presentation will be around 30 minutes long, followed by a question and answer session. If you have questions as we go along, please submit them to the chat box in the lower left corner of your ReadyTalk display. If you don't see that chat box, go ahead and do Show Chat. That's a button at the top left. And we'll address your questions at the end. With that, I will turn it over to our presenters.
Thank you, Matt. This is Chris Benner, and thank you all for joining us today. I want to thank the UC Davis Policy Institute for Energy, Environment, and the Economy for sponsoring this webinar today to share with you our new statewide interactive mapping tool that measures opportunity for communities and regions throughout the state. We're calling this ROI 1.5 because we've had a ROI 1.0 version for the last year or so focused on the Central and San Joaquin Valley, and today is when we're unveiling the new statewide version. I work with the Center for Regional Change at UC Davis, and I'm here today with Sergio Cuellar, who's our Community Engagement Coordinator. For those who don't know the Center for Regional Change, we try and produce research that matters for regions. We're dedicated to producing innovative and collaborative research to inform the building of healthy, prosperous, sustainable, and equitable regions in California and beyond. And when we think about healthy, prosperous, sustainable, and equitable communities and regions, we're aware of real contrasts in our state. Some communities have large vacant lots, high levels of foreclosures, declining businesses, poor health conditions, while other communities are vibrant and thriving places with decent housing, good access to food, good health, vibrant economies. And part of the question becomes, well, what shapes those different patterns of opportunity? And we take a model that really tries to look at the intersections of multiple different factors. Partially has to do with the educational conditions, partially the strength of the economy, partially transportation and mobility access, partially health and the environment, partially housing, and partially the ability of people living in communities to be engaged in the political and civic life in that area. And that it's really at the center of all those different factors that opportunity lies. And so what we wanted to do was create a tool that would be useful for constituencies throughout California to understand those patterns of opportunity and to really dig deep into what shapes those patterns. And we're really designed to produce a tool that can help community advocates, to help businesses, to help policymakers really investigate whatever particular issues they are interested in, but to also have a common information base that can help inform collaboration across those different sectors and different tools. And so we developed this Regional Opportunity Index that was enabled with the generous support of Rabobank. And they were interested in this tool in part for their own internal investment opportunities and thinking about, in part, compliance with the Community Reinvestment Act, but really wanting to know what kind of impact business investments have in local communities. And so we, looking at all the best research around the country about what shapes opportunity, and with a very distinguished peer review team sort of reviewing the development of our tool at each step of the way, developed a website and a tool that is what we think of as not so much a data warehouse, but really a curated set of data that provides a sort of parsimonious but comprehensive set of indicators about what is shaping opportunities in any particular location. One of the key sort of value adds or innovations that we developed in this process was distinguishing between indicators of people and indicators of place. And as you'll see, for example, an indicator of a people factor in the education field might be the percent of the adult population that has a high school degree or higher. That's adult educational attainment. Whereas a measure of a place might be the graduation rate of the local high school. And it's important to distinguish between people and place because it helps to target resources. You may find places that have very strong indicators across all of these different dimensions in the place, but you'll see in the people dimensions that many of the people living in that area are not benefiting from the positive features of the place, and so that can help us target interventions to those people or to those places that make the most difference. And so what we've done is develop these key conceptual categories in which we were then looking for key indicators that would be sort of the best indicator of these processes of opportunity, and then integrated them together into an overall index. And so there, you'll see on the website, there are indices for each of the subdomains, and then an overall index for people and an overall index for place. The conceptual categories that are in red are ones that we're still working to develop the right indicator for. Either there's a problem with the data or there's some issues about conceptually how best to measure it. So those are areas that are works in progress and that'll hopefully be part of ROI 2.0 when we get to that stage. Because one of the key factors that we were looking at in the particular indicators was we wanted indicators that were available and available regularly, ideally annually, so we could update it from year to year to year. Some of the data sources only come out every 2 or 3 years. And we also wanted to make sure it was data that could be measured at as small a geographic level as possible. In this case, it's really the tract level. Some cases we've had to project to that level or combine data, but all of it is available at the tract level. And we wanted to make sure it was the most reliable data that is out there. The data that's integrated into the site is from many different sources, mostly public sector sources. Some of it's Census, Department of Education, some of it's federal data sources, the Federal Communication Commission. Some of it originally comes from Dun & Bradstreet, that's the National Establishment Time Series data set. And so we've integrated all these data into one single site and mapping site. For people who are interested in the particular indicators, I'm happy to go over that in the question and answer, but I think the conceptual categories are the most important. And so what I want to do now is actually jump to the website itself. And when you go to the website, and I'll show you the URL at the very end, you open on this site, and there's a bunch of features under learning about the ROI that includes access to the original data, some sample tutorials, links to other useful resources, background information. But I want to jump right into the interactive maps themselves. And when you click on that interactive map site, up pops up this 3-panel display. The state of California. And the way it starts is on this left index, you can see here, this is the Regional Opportunity Index for people. In the middle pattern is the Regional Opportunity Index for place. And then over on the third side, at the moment, is just an indicator of the total population. I'm going to zoom in because it makes it a little easier to display what's going on when you can see it a little closer. You can see how I just zoomed in that way by selecting a particular area I wanted to see, but you can also, as you would in any Google map, zoom out or zoom in that way. Now, just to orient you, on the overall index or any of the individual indicators, we have a color scheme in which red is essentially a warning, there's problems there, low opportunity. Green is good, all systems go. And there's 5 color schemes, and it essentially divides all census tracts into the states into quintiles. So on the red sites, you know it's the worst 20% of census tracts in the entire state in terms of this Regional Opportunity Index of people. One of the nice things about being able to have these 3 panels is it makes it relatively easy to begin to look at correlations between different factors. And so, for instance, on this left side, if I'm interested in seeing, well, how do these patterns of opportunity relate to the racial composition of the tracts in which they're located. You can see when you click that layer button, you begin to get the overall index, the individual subdomains, and then we have another area down here for demographics. And so you can click on that and say we're interested in understanding, well, the overall people of color. How does that relate to these patterns of opportunity? Well, the reverse of people of color would be the non-Hispanic white population. And so we can see quite clearly in those areas of relatively few non-Hispanic white or large numbers of people of color are areas with low opportunity index for the people in that area, including Oakland, East Oakland, Richmond, whereas the areas of, the eastern suburbs of the Bay Area in this case are areas where there's disproportionately high population of non-Hispanic whites in the state. Just another example, if we look at the Hispanic population, again, you see large concentrations of Hispanic population, Latinos in Oakland and Richmond, correlating with these patterns of low opportunity. But you might notice the patterns of place-based opportunity don't always coincide with people-based opportunity. It begins to provide pointers to what might be going on in certain areas that would be unexpected from what you might think about. I want to dig a little bit deeper before jumping into the overall index to just show you some other features of this site and the ease of mapping individual indicators. You can switch to just two panels if you like to make it a little easier to compare. If you only want to look at one panel, you can switch to one panel pretty easily. And if you want to look at any individual indicators, it's pretty easy to do, again, by just clicking on the layer button. So let's say we're interested in transportation opportunities. And if we click on this mobility transportation opportunity for people, let's say we're interested in commute time. And we can look here and see, well, in parts of Oakland, green area is actually relatively good in terms of commute time. You might ask, well, what is actually our indicator of commute time? Anywhere on here, if you click the question mark, it will actually show you the individual indicator. So in this case, it's the percentage of workers whose commute time is less than 30 minutes. So there we have, out in the eastern suburbs, large populations who are commuting more than 30 minutes. Interestingly, in San Francisco, there's also large populations that are commuting longer than 30 minutes to work. You might be interested in comparing, for instance, how this relates to vehicle availability. And this just shows you, this is a measure, again, of having at least one vehicle per worker in the household, or at least one vehicle overall. And it shows that there are large portions of the population in San Francisco and Oakland, et cetera, that are relatively low on that measure of vehicle access, which might help explain some of the reasons why they can't commute as far, or might explain some of the reasons why it's taking people so long to commute. Another thing you might want to do, just looking at individual indicators, is say you want to compare different places in the state on a particular indicator. So say we had a question about, well, is the economy in Santa Clara County doing better or worse than the economy in Orange County? Well, if you take off the scale and location sync buttons, actually I'll just take off the location button for the moment. If we keep the scale button on, then it's the same size. And then let's say we're interested in the economy in place. So you can click on the overall economy opportunity place on the left panel. We'll do the same thing on the right panel. So we're looking at the same thing, economy opportunity place. It should be identical map. Well, now let's search for where we want to go. In this case, I want to go to Santa Clara County. But as you can see, you can search by school district, you can search by county, you can search by actually the number of the census tract if you know that, cities and census designated places. You can also search by state assembly and state senate districts, as well as the U.S. congressional district. But if I search for not Santa County, but Santa Clara County, it'll jump to Santa Clara. Sorry, I've done the school district there, but if we do it by county, which is what I wanted to do, it'll jump to the county level. But on this right side, say I want to compare it to Orange County. And that allows you to compare across different parts of the state. And we can see that, in fact, well, in Santa Clara County, there's a lot more disparity in economic opportunity. Parts of the county are the darkest green color, doing very well. Other parts of East San Jose are in the lowest number of census tracts in the state, whereas in Orange County, some areas are doing quite well, some areas aren't doing as bad. While I'm here, I'll show you one other feature, which is the ability to print any map that you have showing. And I'll just print that and grab a quick glass of water while it's printing. And up pops the map that shows the title of whatever it is you're mapping, a description of what's there, the date that it was printed, and the URL. That's actually our old URL, which we will update right after this webinar. So that shows you some of the features. And one of the things you can see on this quite clearly is in areas of South Central Los Angeles and East LA, the patterns of low economic opportunity are quite obvious. So let me get back to the index itself and how that might be used to explore conditions in a particular area. So I'm going to resync the location function. I'm going to go back to Orange County on both sites. I'm going to take it back to the index of people on the one side, on the left, and the index of place on the other. And here we begin to see in parts of Orange County, there are populations who are not doing very well, quite low opportunity. And if I zoom into a particular area here where there's a bit of a concentration of people with low opportunities, we can explore a little more. One thing I will show too is if you're not exactly clear where you're looking at any point you can take off the fade button and you'll be able to see the street scene underneath. So this is part of Santa Ana. You can actually switch to the aerial view if you want to zoom in on a particular area and see what's there. There are different options of mapping that show a little more of the terrain. I'll go back to the street function and bring this back up. So here's an interesting tract. If we look at this tract right here, it's orange, which means it's low opportunity on people, whereas here it's green, relatively high opportunity for place. Why might that be the case? What might be the priorities of investments in this particular area that would help improve opportunity for people? Well, if we click on the census tract, up will pop this interactive graph feature which shows the individual subdomains as they compare to the statewide average on what's showing on the map when you click on it. So we can see here's a tract that is below average for the state on education, economy, housing. It's actually doing quite well on access to transportation and mobility, about average on health and the environment, a little less than average on civic life. Whereas this area is doing relatively well on education, the economy, health, and the environment. So you might wonder, well, what's going on? And if you click on this map on the economy bar, for instance, this works with any bar, and then click on the tract again, up pops the individual indicators that make up that domain index. So we can do the same thing on this side, and we see that what we have in this tract is a tract in which there's actually a relatively high level of employment. That's the reverse of unemployment, so it's a low unemployment. We structure all our indicators in this way so that positive numbers are good and negative numbers are less. But this is a population that has a minimum basic income. Now, if we click on this and then click again, it shows us the actual value. So here's a place where, and again, if we're curious what the actual indicator is, this is the percentage of people with income over 200% of the federal poverty level, which is essentially a better measure of poverty than the official poverty measure. And it says that only 51% of people in that area have that minimum income. So if we go back to that overall measure, this is essentially a area that has large numbers of working poor. So they're working, but the incomes they're measuring or earning are not very high. And yet it's in an area where there's a relatively high level of job availability and the quality of jobs that are in that area is quite high. There are some issues about, in recent years, job growth and business growth declining there greater than the state as a whole. But there's clearly some problem with people in the area not getting access to the jobs that are going on. I will show you one other thing, that if you want to get data on a particular neighborhood, if you switch from this tool, from the identify function to the report function, and then click on the census tracts, the individual data points come up for whatever census tracts you might be interested in. And then if you click on the CSV file, it exports results to a CSV comma-supported or comma-separated values or Excel format. So it's really easy to download data on specific neighborhoods as well as the overall data set. I'm going to go back here to the overall index so we can dig in again, and I'll do the same thing on this side. So I want to dig in a little bit now to education, because we've discovered that we have working poor that are not being able to access jobs that are in this neighborhood. The obvious first thing to look at has to do with education. And when you click on education, we can see here that in this particular tract, relatively low percentage of people have a college education. These are two measures of early childhood learning that are kind of split between math and English proficiency. And then kids are getting to school in the early areas. So here's an area that is mostly a lack of college-educated adults. But when we look at education in this particular census tract, we start to see that the graduation rate from high school is about average, slightly above average. But the percentage of people graduating who have the minimum requirements to be eligible for the University of California or Cal State University system, the so-called A through G requirements, is below average. Whereas teacher experience is pretty high average, above average. So this tells us something about what's going on in the schools. People are graduating and teachers are pretty high quality, but there's an issue of students not getting college-ready courses. So that helps us prioritize in that area. Let me show you one other tract that helps to show a slightly different pattern. And again, I'm going to zoom back out to Orange County. This time, I'm going to move this again to the overall regional opportunity index people, do this one, the overall regional opportunity index place, and then zoom in to this tract over here, which is kind of an interesting tract because it shows the opposite pattern of what I just showed. Here's a tract where the place indicators are overall low, puts it in the bottom 20% of all tracts in the state, where the people indicators are quite high. And again, you can immediately see the economy is doing quite well in terms of people who are living there. Their economic opportunity is great. But the jobs that are in this particular area, the economic conditions, low job availability, low job growth, low job quality. So how is it that people are able to do well even though the jobs in that local area are not so well? Well, the obvious answer is that they must be driving further or traveling further to get to those jobs. And indeed, if you click on transportation and see the conditions there, in fact, large levels of vehicle availability, and the commute time, which in this case is red, shows you again that you have a relatively high percentage of people whose commute time is over 30 minutes, or a low number whose commute time is less than 30 minutes. So that gives you a sense of some of the features of the site. At any point you can zoom back out to the state as a whole. And as I said, the previous site was all around the Central and San Joaquin Valley, so all those indicators are available for that as well. I do want to point out that we also have a companion website that has a similar structure of 3 panels that's designed to look at conditions for youth in the state. The youth are our future. The future of the state's really depending on their well-being, and it's centered on an index of youth well-being that combines indicators across 4 dimensions: health, education, community involvement, and social relationships. And that website enables a much deeper look at disparities by race and gender within school districts and at zip code level. And Sergio has been particularly involved in some community engagement work with that website and could answer any questions about that, as well as the ways that youth and others have been using the Regional Opportunity Index around the state. As I mentioned, our hope is to expand to ROI 2.0. We're hopeful to be able to announce soon, hopefully, some additional support for making these changes possible. What we envision is putting multiple years of data on the site to allow you to analyze change over time, to be able to look at custom geographies. So as I mentioned, the indices are all calculated at this point on statewide averages, and the map shows the color scheme based on those statewide averages. But if you're interested, for instance, in an individual county or looking at a regional planning body, the new site will allow you to customize the geography. It will allow you to custom weight the individual indicators and domains. So say you think that education is particularly important, you could weight that a little higher and see what that changes in terms of understanding patterns of opportunity. We also will put in place a panel that allows people to upload their own data layers. Could be foundations interested in showing where they're making grants. It could be banks looking at where they're making investments. It could be policymakers looking at where spending patterns are changing. And that will be behind a password-protected part of the site so that confidential data can be available only to those with the password. We'll be adding some new data listed there. We'll be updating annually. We'll be putting more success stories. There are some tutorials already on the website that you can search for as well. Perhaps with maybe 3.0 we can expand to other states and nationwide as well. I'm going to stop there so we have a chance to take any questions. That's the URL for the website. If you forget what it is, just remember Interact is support for interactive. So interact.regionalchange, it's the Center for Regional Change, .ucdavis.edu, and then /ROI for Regional Opportunity Index or Return on Investment, or just the French word for king if you prefer. And we'll be happy to take any questions now.
Great. All right, excellent. And yeah, we have quite a few questions ready, so let's go ahead and get started with those. First question about the scale of analysis. Is it possible to create, that users create their own geographic region to combine data? For example, can they combine data for 2 or more counties?
You can customize the geography of comparison when we get to ROI 2.0, assuming we get to that point. At the moment, it's not possible to do that. You can, as I suggested for individual indicators, go in and select any number of census tracts on this report function, and that will allow you to combine census tracts and get the data for those individual census tracts based on whatever indicator is showing on the screen. For more users who are more familiar with large data sets, if you go to learn about the ROI and look at data, they will take you to a description including all the metadata and analysis of it that's available here, and then a full version of all the data. So all the individual indicators, the calculated indices are available here where you can download in an Excel format. And I'll just open that so you can see what that looks like. It takes a little while to load because it's a big file. But it's pretty intuitively organized. It has the individual census tract, the county in which it's located, and all the individual indicators that are part of that. Oh, they can't see that. Sorry, I've got to share my Excel file with you. See if I can make that happen. Firefox, PowerPoint. All right, so there's the Excel file. And if you go, there is a data dictionary, and then this ROI, the December 15th version, you'll see it has the county, the track number, and then all the additional measures, all the indicators that are part of ROI, et cetera. So you can quite easily combine data for counties that way, tract by tract.
Great. So when you look at this opportunity index for people, can you see a racial breakdown? For example, non-Hispanic, white, African American, et cetera?
On this particular map, you cannot, other than what I was showing earlier of looking at the demographic characteristics where you can show that correlation between opportunity index and the pattern that's there. I will say that actually let me do it on a different site. Our youth site, which is just interact.regionalchange.ucdavis.edu/youth, putting youth on the map, has the ability to look at that in a little more depth. Again, a 3-panel starting point. Here is the Youth Wellbeing Index. I'm going to just zoom in a little bit to make it a little easier, and in this case, zoom into Sacramento. And in this case, up pops the Index of Youth Wellbeing for this particular district, how that compares to the state average, and what the individual components of that are. And when you click on the scales of justice, it shows you an immediate breakdown by gender and by race. So you can see immediately that African American youth in this district are doing worse than, for instance, an Asian, about the same as this Hispanic, less than white. And when you click on any individual domain of that indicator, up will come up both the domain score and the individual indicators that are part of that. And again, you can look at the individual breakdown in that case. Here, we have a youth well-being on education, again, where African Americans are below half of what an optimal score in this measure would be. So it's useful to be able to use these two sites together.
All right. We have a couple of questions here about similarities or differences between this tool and CalEnviroScreen. Are you familiar with that, and perhaps any other similar index tools in the field?
Yeah. So the CalEnviroScreen is an effort that combines exposure to environmental disamenities, particularly air pollution, but other toxic releases, along with a measure of socioeconomic vulnerability. And the way it's been used, for instance, in SB 535, the cap-and-trade legislation, is really as a threshold where the bottom 20% of scores within that index qualify as being disadvantaged communities in the state. So conceptually, it's pretty similar in that you're combining indicators and trying to look at the relationship between them, and in those places where low performance on multiple indicators coincide, those are places of particular concern. The difference is that we have indicators in those 6 broad areas. It includes a little bit on health indicators, but it also has some environmental indicators and all the other ones. I will show the one indicator we have here on air quality, where you can see, particularly in the southern San Joaquin Valley is where the worst air quality in the state is. You can see it a bit in the Los Angeles Basin as well, as then you get further in the low air quality in that area. Other tools that are useful, recently PolicyLink released a website called the National Equity Atlas, which is a great national tool for looking at broad patterns within metropolitan regions, and they provide some really useful graphs and charts. So if you're interested in sort of overall patterns at a regional scale, that's a very useful site. It doesn't go down to the tract level. Sergio, do you have some other examples?
Well, yeah, so I was just going to say, we are going to be engaging in some work in the Coachella Valley with some environmental justice partners to use, working with OEHA and the Cal EnviroScreen to do workshops on how community folks that are doing environmental justice work can utilize the tool of EnviroScreen to understand the burdens that are happening in their communities, and then as they apply for funding using our tools, the ROI to be the tool to tell us where some of those investments should be going. So very complementary to some of those tools, especially the Cal EnviroScreen, to be able to then, again, look at what the burdens are, if they're meeting the threshold to apply for the funds, cap and trade funds, and then once those funds are granted, right, is to then use these tools as a way to start determining where the money should go and what the money should go towards. So just kind of, we are going to be engaging that within the next probably 6 months, and so we will definitely be sharing stories that come out of that work, and then again, any of the work that comes out with OEHA to be able to combine the two tools, or at least show how we complement the two tools as well.
The one other tool I'll mention that is very useful, and there's many others out there as well, but A Measure of America has a very useful human development index that combines indicators across several dimensions, and again has some very useful graphical interface around charts. They're primarily focused on a county level data and comparing across the country as a whole, although they have a few custom reports on particular states and regions of the U.S., and just recently released a very interesting study on California, which goes much more in depth in a static report at the moment on conditions in California. But many of those indicators are also on their website, which is measureofamerica.org, I believe.
And is this the first state level tool that you're aware of?
Focused on California?
Yeah. Oh, are there other states that have done similar things?
I am not familiar with any other one that uses this kind of comprehensive index on a statewide level other than California. I will say that we have learned a tremendous amount from a number of other partners around the country that have been doing this kind of opportunity mapping for many years, particularly the Kirwan Institute at Ohio State University, and John Powell was the director there for many years. He's now moved to the Haas Institute at UC Berkeley and developing some very innovative opportunity mapping projects there. And they have done some very good static maps. But in terms of this kind of interactive mapping-based web tool, I think this is the first as far as we know about.
Good. So can you provide a little more explanation of the use of the statewide averages? So were those data factored in to the sort of the baseline to which you compared the tracts when you determined whether they were above or below average?
Yeah, so the methodology is a little bit complicated for constructing the index, and I would encourage people who want to know the deep methodology to go to that metadata site. But essentially, we're taking the statewide average for each individual indicator, and when you're looking at an indicator map on the website, it's just mapping that individual indicator and dividing it up by quintiles, so 20% lowest, the 20 to 40 next lowest, 40 to 60, etc. In order to combine it into an index, you have to standardize the scale of all indicators. One way that's often done is just using the z-score. It's basically a measure of the average versus the standard deviation, and it standardizes all indicators. This is maybe getting a little wonky for some people, but I'm kind of a data nerd, so I'll go there. We decided to use what's called a geometric mean rather than an arithmetic mean in combining indicators into the index. And essentially what that does is it prevents any single indicator from moving the index too much, either up or down. So it, essentially rewards places that move indicators in concert, and anyone that has sort of an outlier, that outlier can't move the index so much. So in order to do that, we standardized all the variables from essentially 0 to 100. So rather than having positive and negative values of z-scores centered around the mean, they're all standardized from 0 to 1. And then combined using that geometric mean into the index, and then the value of the index is what's reported and mapped there. Was that too obscure enough?
I'm sure it'll be of interest to some of our listeners. Okay, so is there any distinction made in the data between rural and urban tracts?
Very good question, and I really appreciate that question because it allows me to show a couple other layers. We do have a layer in here under the other category that shows the rural-urban commuting area designation. And basically that divides all census tracts into these broadly 4 different categories. It's actually 10 categories, but we've combined them. So one are places that are either part of or have commuting flow into a metropolitan area, those that are commuting into a micropolitan area, those that are commuting into a small town, and those that are commuting into rural areas. So that's one sort of broad distinction between truly rural, which is that orange category, and areas that are commuting to small towns or smaller areas in the state. The one other indicator where that rural-urban distinction makes a big difference is in our measure of essentially food deserts. It's access to a supermarket. And if we look at the way that indicator is actually measured, it says this is from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and it's the percentage who live within a half mile in urban areas or 10 miles of a supermarket in rural areas. And this is a sort of simple binary designation between rural and urban. And it makes it look a little funny in some cases, like for here where this would be classified probably as an urban tract and has very low access to a supermarket. Right next door in what we know is a more rural part of the Sacramento region, it actually shows up green because the threshold in this case for a rural community is 10 miles rather than a half mile. So that just gives an indication of how we're trying to do a little bit of difference between rural and urban areas, but it becomes complex to analyze in that way. So I would urge people who are particularly interested in that distinction to use that rural-urban commuting area designation because it gives you that greater picture of how that's classified within that dimension. And that's put out, by the way, by the USDA as well, the Economic Research Service.
So have you thought about reaching out to potential users of this tool? And you mentioned the training and, of course, this webinar, but beyond that, how do you have plans to sort of do training for folks maybe in local governments, legislature, state agencies, nonprofits?
Yeah, definitely. So I think, up to this point, it's been mainly webinar, and then we've attended a couple of conferences to share the tool as well. And then, on an individual basis, as folks have attended webinars and conferences, and there's interest from that organization, they usually get a hold of us via email, and then we start to think about what the work could look like. It could be that, they do one-on-one training. It can go deeper into, like, maybe they have a project that they're working on, they'd like to see how it works, and then we can start actually working with them to do the one-on-one trainings, but then also go deeper and provide, maybe scope out a body of work that we can do with them to use the tool, as well as get the outcomes they want to see with the tool, right? So it really varies, again, in interest, and also I would say in in the capacity that we have in resourcing. It does cost us to have staff go out and do one-on-ones. But if there is interest, then we can definitely figure out ways to work with groups individually on a regional level, maybe host like a regional seminar, one-on-one workshop. We're open to actually any type of getting the word out there on these tools and showcasing how to use them with your work. So, in any way that you all feel would be beneficial for folks, please contact us and let us know, and then we'd be definitely interested in talking and providing some type of service for you also.
I think the one thing I'd add to that is I think we'd be particularly interested if there's agencies that have a significant number of people who might want to use this site to think about train the trainer type programs where we could work quite intensely with 2, 3, 4 people on a multiple hour, training on how to use the site, and then they could go out and train other people in the organization. So either model we're quite open to.
Good. Okay, so we have a couple questions about use of the tool and how it has been or how you envision it being incorporated into policy making and funding processes and decision making.
Well, there's multiple ways it can be used. I will say that one of the ways that we actually initially developed this was in working in regional planning processes under California's climate change legislation, particularly around SB 375, the Sustainable Communities Development Act, whatever it's called, Darrell Steinberg's act that was really trying to promote greater density of development within metropolitan areas as part of meeting regional greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. And this was a very useful way. We were doing work with the Sacramento Area Council of Governments to begin to look at potential, what they were calling in our region, transit priority areas, areas where they were trying to fast track or streamline new development that would include either housing or mixed use developments close to high quality transit lines, and being able to look at the levels of sort of opportunity by both people and place allowed them and us working with them to really think about how we should be prioritizing. At one point there were 10 different sites they were really possibly focusing on, and by looking at relative patterns of people opportunity or place opportunity, being able to kind of narrow that in to 3 or 4 sort of high priority sites that would both have a high potential of economic success because there were indicators of good economic opportunity or place-based opportunity, but also have the potential for really moving indicators on people opportunity or socioeconomic opportunity, and so it helped prioritize that. Some of the tools around jobs and housing, and particularly that jobs housing fit metric that I looked at. Or did I show the jobs housing fit one? Did I skip that? Oh, let me show you the jobs housing fit one, which is kind of a useful one. I'm going to go back to the Bay Area because it's kind of an interesting area. One of the other categories here is a measure of the relationship between jobs and housing. And transportation planners are often interested in looking at the balance between jobs and housing, because if any individual jurisdiction has a rough balance between jobs and housing, then at least in theory, people don't have to commute to other jurisdictions to get to work. But research has shown that it's not just the balance that's important, but it's also the fit. In this case, what we're looking at is where there are concentrations of low-wage jobs, are there sufficient affordable rental units nearby so that particularly low-income people don't have to travel far, which has both negative environmental impacts of greater greenhouse gas emissions, but also social impacts because people are spending more on transportation. So here in the Bay Area, we can see the red areas are places that have greater than 4 times as many low-wage jobs as there are affordable rental units. Much of the East Bay is in rough balance between that. The yellow areas are places that are kind of bordering on that. It's interesting to look at San Francisco, which has, of course, had higher than state level and higher than federal level minimum wages, so the number of jobs that are low wage are somewhat less. and had a very strong policy both on rent control, but then also on building and construction of affordable rental units. So that actually comes through in the data that San Francisco is often seen as a very unaffordable place to live, and there are certainly people that are being displaced. But compared to much of the Silicon Valley, the peninsula and other areas, it's much better. We also have a similar measure that's focused not just on a jurisdiction, but that is at a neighborhood level. And this is one where the darker color reds are places where there's actually large concentrations of jobs. One thing I will show you too is you can turn on and off the legend if it gets in your way a little bit. But again, this allows you to sort of zoom in and see particular areas where there might be concentrations of low-wage jobs but not affordable housing units. So there's, Pleasant Hill and Walnut Creek area. So this can be used to guide affordable housing policy. Many cities throughout the state, actually in the Bay Area, kind of as we speak, there's the process of putting together cities' housing elements and the regional housing needs allocation or assessment. So this is a very useful tool to help guide that kind of policy as well. But those are just a couple of examples. I think in all of these areas, there's ways that this ready access to data can help inform policy and really spark discussions amongst different constituencies. I will say, as I mentioned earlier, this is really a curated set of sort of key indicators on any single topic, and point to interrelationships between factors and processes that can help us get beyond silos. They're not a substitute for the more in-depth analysis and detailed information on any single area. So if you're interested in transportation or health or environment, there's certainly going to be many other data points and indicators that will be important for informing policy. But we hope that this can be a really useful tool for democratizing data, for promoting participation, and really promoting discussion about the relationships between these different factors.
All right. Well, we have time for another question here. A lot of people there's a lot of interest in this tool and excitement about it, and people are already looking forward to the next version. So some questions about tentative timing for ROI 2.0 and sort of thoughts about how it might be expanded. For example, will you perhaps work with other states so they can, get their own tool going? And is that possible given your setup?
Yes and yes. In terms of the timing of these features of 2.0, it's really just dependent on funding at this point. We've kind of sketched out the actual data that's needed for this and the programming that's needed. Assuming we have a couple of potential funders who are interested, but we haven't heard definitely yet. If those come through as we hope, we could have ROI 2.0, most of these done probably by the middle of 2015, June, July, something like that. So cross your fingers. In terms of expanding to other states and nationwide, we're actually particularly interested in working with other groups to do it in other states, and partially because many of the data points that we use are from state agencies. If we were to launch this nationwide, then we're limited to using nationwide data that's comprehensive across the whole country. And there's obviously some advantages of that in that we could look at the country as a whole, but you lose some of the specificity of some of the data we have at the moment, and because of some of the features of the American Community Survey, that it's only a survey, not a 100% census, there are high levels of margins of error or error measures at a track level on some indicators. But either of those we'd be interested in expanding. I will say at the moment our first priority is really kind of fleshing out these features of 2.0 for users in the state of California. But if others know about opportunities for partnering with other states or thinking about nationwide expansion, we'd love to be able to do that as well.
Great. Well, that's about all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank our speakers for coming in and all of our listeners for tuning in. We'll be sending out a follow-up email with some information about the tool, and as well as a link to a recording of today's webinar so you can share with colleagues. And that's it for now. Everyone have a good afternoon.